All right, folks. It is 12:45, 12:46 now, and we are live streaming. I'd like to call this meeting to order. This is the regular meeting, Commission on Chicago Landmarks. Today's date is Thursday, August 3rd, 2023. I'd like to do the roll call of the commission members. Vice Chair, Commissioner Jekowitz.
Present.
Commissioner Cox is not here at this time. Commissioner Burns.
Present.
Commissioner Fair.
Present.
Commissioner Ponce. Commissioner Rubin.
Present.
Thank you. And is Commissioner Tolliver going to? Okay, all right. As the other commissioners. We do have a quorum, though. As the notice for today's meeting stated, commission meetings will no longer be adhering to the emergency rules governing the conduct of remote public commission meetings and provisions for remote public participation in place during the COVID-19 public health emergency as a gubernatorial disaster declaration is no longer in effect. As such, public comment will be heard after each agenda item as per our previous meeting format. I want to state for the record that Commissioner Tolliver is here as well. Okay. I'd like to ask anyone wishing to make a statement on today's agenda to complete a public comment card and give the card to a member of the staff. Comment cards are available at the door. As a courtesy to other individuals wishing to offer comments, we ask that members of the general public limit your comments, your statements to 3 minutes or less. When the time comes for public comment on the individual item on the agenda, I'll call names from the cards and ask you to come forward to the microphone to make your statement. At that time, please state your name, interest, organization, or company you represent, if any. And then, before we begin, I'd like to make an announcement that the Commission will be holding a special meeting on Monday, August 7th at 1:00 p.m. in City Council chambers regarding the preliminary designation of St. Adalbert Parish Complex at 1622 to 1658 West 17th Street and 1633 to 1659 West 16th Street. And the church is located in the 25th Ward. I'd ask that because St. Adalbert's is not on today's agenda, in order to be respectful for those who do have items on today's agenda, the members of the public wishing to speak regarding the preliminary landmark designation on Monday, please hold your comments until Monday's special commission meeting. If you're not able to attend that meeting, you can send comments to the commission's email at ccl@cityofchicago.org. And also for the record, Commissioner Cox is here.
Thank you.
Welcome. And Alderman Sigcho Lopez.
He's out in the lobby holding a press conference.
Oh, okay. Well, that was his opportunity to speak.
Yes,
So let's do the approval of the minutes of the previous meeting. That was the regular meeting of July 6th, 2023. Those were included in your packets. I'd like to request a motion to approve the minutes of the July 6th, 2023 regular commission meeting. Is there a motion?
So moved, Commissioner Fair.
Thank you. And a second?
Second.
Any discussion? If none, I'd like to take a vote on the motion. All in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? The motion carries unanimously. Item number 2 is the final landmark recommendation on the Eugenie Lane Apartments in the 2nd Ward. This is located at 235 West Eugenie Street, and I'd like to call on Matt Crawford for the report, please.
Okay, thank you, Commissioners. You'll recall, in June, you voted a preliminary landmark recommendation for the Eugenie Lane Apartments. And last month, you heard a favorable recommendation from the Department of Planning on the wisdom of designating this building. The Condominium Association, as you know, has asked for this, and they have formally consented to designation in writing. So you can now consider a final landmark recommendation to City Council. The building is located at Eugenie Street and North Park Avenue in Old Town. It's also located in the Old Town Triangle District, which was designated as a Chicago landmark in 1977, when the building before you was just 15 years old. At that time, there was insufficient perspective of time to evaluate the building, and it is regarded as non-contributing within the existing landmark district. But with the passage of time, the building's architectural significance has become clear, and designation will ensure its preservation. In June, you preliminarily found the building meets 3 criteria for Chicago landmark designation, including criterion 1 for its heritage values. And those values are something that you recently recognized during the designation of the Clark Netsch House, but it bears repeating. While Old Town was built out in the 19th century, the neighborhood developed culturally in the 20th. Beginning in the 1930s, artists like Edgar Miller and Saul Kogan acquired Victorian buildings like the Carl Street Studios at Wright and renovated these in highly imaginative ways for artists. Another development was the establishment in 1947 of the Old Town Triangle Association, an organization which still exists and supports the neighborhood's artistic character through its annual art fair and other programming. So it was into this context that developer Jared Schlaze and commissioned Ben Weiss of the growing architectural firm Harry Weiss and Associates to build the Eugenie Lane Apartments in 1962. Other noteworthy architects from Chicago shown here also designed small, modern infill residences in Old Town around the same time for themselves or for clients. You also found in June that the building meets the criterion for architecture. Simple, traditional materials are a signature of Ben Weiss's work. The palette for Eugenie Lane includes Chicago common brick, louvered wood, and sheet metal. That simplicity carries through to the architectural drawings for the building, which are a mere 10 sheets. Here is a plan showing the building divided into 7 bays, with party walls clearly expressed on the exterior as brick piers. Here's the front elevation, showing the large windows flanked by louvered ventilation panels. And the rear elevation, nearly identical to the front, with the exception of projecting metal bays which contain closets for the apartment, an inside-out design feature. The building respects the context of the neighborhood. The bays reflect the rhythm of the street, and the mansard roof reduces the building's apparent height. In his architecture, Weiss endeavored to express a building's program, and he achieved this at Eugenie by placing each apartment's entry at the exterior, which you see here at the ground floor. On the upper floors, exterior stairs lead to galleries that provide communication to the apartment entrances on the 2nd and 3rd floor. Here is a current view of the balcony level and a historic view of an interior of one of the apartments. Each living room was designed with a cast iron wood-burning stove, very countercultural for the time. And in June, you found that Ben Weiss was a significant architect. Ben is seated here at the center of this family photo from 1960. Standing next to him is his brother, his older brother, Harry Weiss. After graduating from architecture at Harvard, Ben began working at Harry Weiss and Associates, or HWA. An important early commission is Ben's design for the Northside Junior High School in Columbus, Indiana, where he mined tradition, here using arches and piers in brick. In Hyde Park, he designed the Gardens, a group of townhouses with projecting brick bays. And nearby in Kenwood, these are his Greenwood Park townhouses with austere angled bays. Next door, Weiss designed Lake Village East in 1973. The apartment tower employs what Weiss called a minimum perimeter design. The 38 elevations of the building reduce its exterior envelope for economy while also maximizing views. Weiss would return to this approach for several residential towers in Chicago and elsewhere in the United States. Weiss is also known as a designer of academic institutions throughout the country, particularly in Iowa, where he used massing and fenestration to support the specific program of each building. Aside from his architectural practice, Ben was a founding member of the Chicago Seven, a group of young architects in Chicago that formed in 1976 that questioned the orthodoxy of modern architecture. The Seven mounted exhibitions to point to new directions. The most significant was late entries to the Tribune Tower competition of 1980 that was a showcase for postmodernism in America. In 1977, Ben established his own firm with his wife, architect Cynthia Weiss, and Thomas Hickey, and Arnie Seegers. A significant work of the new venture was Chestnut Place Apartments in Chicago, designed by Ben and Cynthia with Peter Landon in 1982, alternating layers of red and buff brick recalling Italian Renaissance, Italian Romanesque architecture. The architects also commissioned muralist Richard Haas to paint the lobby after a Florentine basilica. While not regarded as a specialist in ecclesiastical architecture, some of Weiss's most recognized works are his churches, including the Evelyn Chapel in Bloomington, a twin-spired chapel at Warburg College, and Westminster Presbyterian in Peoria. All of these take historic forms and abstract them in a very detailed and fresh way. Throughout his career, Weiss was a pillar in Chicago's historic preservation movement. He co-founded the Chicago Heritage Committee that brought attention to 19th century gems, such as the Garrick Theater. He also led a fundraising campaign to save the Glessner House and established there the Chicago Architecture Foundation, which still thrives. He also served as a very distinguished member of this commission for over a decade. You found preliminarily that the building meets the integrity criterion. It's been extremely well maintained and retains excellent physical integrity. Its setting is also remarkably intact. Building is located in the Second Ward. Alderman Hopkins has provided a letter of support for the landmark designation. As you know, the condominium board also has requested and is very much in support of a landmark designation. So we recommend that the significant historical and architectural features of the building be identified as all exterior elevations, including its roof lines. And you have a final landmark recommendation before you to that effect. I'm here to answer any questions.
Thank you, Matt. Does the commission have any questions for Matt at this time? Having none, is Ms. Moriarty here? Would you like to come up and make a statement? If you could state your name and...
Jan Moriarty, Janice Moriarty.
I'm going to ask you to speak in the microphone.
Janice Moriarty. Yes, I'm the president of the Condominium Association, and I thank again Matt for all the work he's done. I really enjoyed that presentation. It just reinforces what a great building that we're able to live in. And as I mentioned before, it looks exactly as it did in 1962. The condominium declaration prohibits any exterior changes to the building. So I'm hoping that you'll grant us the landmark status, and you can be assured that the building is going to continue on as a great example of mid-century architecture and a great signature from Ben Weiss.
Thank you, Ms. Moriarty. Does Commissioner Cox?
So thank you for your participation, and helping us recognize the mid-20th century modern legacy. And I think there'll be many more, hopefully, that will take the lead. I'm always curious whether something that was constructed in 62, whether any of the original owners are still occupying the structures, or have they all turned over to new owners? And if there aren't any of the original owners, what is the longest tenure that someone has of one of the units?
Well, I was a renter in 1977, and when it went condo in 1979, I bought the unit. So I think I'm the oldest, the longest term person associated with the building. We just recently had a townhouse level sale, and that person was also a renter in 1964, and he bought in 1979, and he just recently sold his unit. And we also had a person who was an original renter in 1962, and then she bought her unit, and she just recently passed away this last year. So I have a long history with the building, and we have a number of, currently on our board, our treasurer is an architect, and he's been in the building for like 6 years, and we do have some other long-standing owners who bought in 1980 and are still there in the building.
That's great. I mean, again, it's always a testament that the architect has done his job well when there are long tenures of people residing in a location. You love it, and you realize the unique opportunity
Right.
that you've been given, and part of that opportunity is also the stewardship that comes along with that, and it looks like current owners have been great stewards, so just want to thank you for going through the process and making what is now going to be a lasting contribution to the historic district. Thank
Okay,
you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? If not, I'd like to call for public comment on this agenda item. Ward Miller, please.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I'm Ward Miller. I'm the Richard H. Driehaus Executive Director of Preservation Chicago, and honored to be here today. As Ben Weiss was such an important member of this commission for so long, and one of the original preservationists, if you will, sort of standing in the shoe, we're sort of all standing in his shoes, if you will, 60 plus years later. And I also wanted to mention that not only is it wonderful to talk about this building today and the career of Ben Weiss, but also mention that it's wonderful to hear and see pictures of the Garrick Theater and Richard Nichols' efforts and those early preservation efforts to save these historic buildings that unfortunately we lost. But here we are 62 years later talking about these buildings, and that just shows you how important Chicago's architecture is on the world stage. And I just wanted to mention that. We're honored to support the final landmark, formal landmark recommendation for the Eugenie Lane Apartments in Old Town. We worked with the late Terry Tatum, who was a part of the staff here for decades, and the Old Town Triangle Association to identify and further clarify the mid-century modern buildings. And of course, as you saw, there are a number of them that are really by some significant architects. All you have to do is look at the little modest building by Bruce Graham and realize that he also designed the Sears Tower for 35 years, the tallest building in the world. So there's a lot of amazing mid-century modern architecture in the Old Town Triangle and also throughout our city that we'd like to see recognized. But always grateful for these reports coming forward. So I want to thank all of you, the staff at DPD, the leadership here, Commissioner Cox, and all for a really remarkable day. And looking forward to more of these landmarks, these mid-century landmarks in the Old Town District. So thank you.
Thank you, Ward. Nobody else has signed up to speak on this item. So with that, oh, yes, sir.
Can I speak on behalf of Alderman Hopkins?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And if you could remember to, if you could sign in also when you.
Thank you. I'm just here on behalf of Alderman Hopkins. My name is Brian Pelrine. I'm staffer in his office. You have the letter on hand of his support, and he just wanted to express his appreciation for everybody's efforts on this project, in particular, Old Town Triangle and Historic Preservation staff. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, any further discussion on this item? If not, I'd like to request a motion to adopt the final landmark recommendation to City Council for the Eugenie Lane Apartments. Is there a motion?
So moved.
So moved by Commissioner Tolliver. Is there a second? Commissioner Dekovich seconds that. I'll do the roll call. Commissioner Cox,
Yes.
Commissioner Burns,
Yes.
Commissioner Fair,
Yes.
Commissioner Hughes, Commissioner Ponce,
Yes.
Commissioner Rubin,
Yes.
and I am a yes as well. The motion carries unanimously. Thank you. I do want to recognize there are a number of people who have just walked in the door. I had made the announcement earlier at the start of this meeting that the commission will be holding a special meeting on Monday, August 7th at 1:00 p.m. in the City Council chambers regarding the preliminary designation of St. Adalbert Parish Complex at 1622 to 1658 West 17th Street and 1633 to 1659 West 16th Street. I'm going to ask that because St. Adalbert's is not on today's agenda, and in order to be respectful for those who have signed up to speak on today's agenda, the members of the public wishing to speak on that agenda item, please hold your comments until Monday's special meeting. If you're not able to attend that meeting, you can send comments to the commission's email at ccl@cityofchicago.org. And I want to recognize that Alderman Sigcho Lopez is here and I believe supporting that meeting. Is that correct, sir? Okay. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is the preliminary landmark recommendation located at 2678 West Washington Boulevard in the 27th Ward. And Kendall and Han, if you'd like to call for do the report.
Thank you, Chairman Wan. Oh, still not looking right here. Oh, this is so tricky. We'll do it this way. There we go. Okay. So the Historic Preservation Division received a permit application for demolition of the main house at 2678 West Washington Boulevard on May 19th. The building is rated orange and therefore the permit was subject to the demolition delay. Per typical process, staff evaluated the property, which contained 3 structures, and found that they believe it meets criteria for individual landmark designation. Staff met with the applicant and explained the logistics of the demolition delay, their findings regarding eligibility for landmark designation, and possible alternatives. The applicant shared that he had no plans for the site beyond demolition and did not wish to withdraw the application. The 90-day demolition delay period is set to expire August 16th. The site is located in the East Garfield Park community area on the west side in the 27th Ward. It sits mid-block between California and Talman Avenues and extends from Washington Boulevard to the next street north, Maypole Avenue. It has a frontage of 154 feet on Washington, 138 feet on Maypole, and the parcel is 193 feet deep. As I mentioned before, the property includes 3 buildings. The aerial at the bottom right shows their locations. The structure in yellow is the main house, The structure in purple is the dormitory, and the structure in blue is the coach house. So Historic Preservation Division staff believe that the 2678 West Washington site meets 3 criteria for Chicago landmark designation, including criterion 1 for heritage. Originally built for wool merchant John Howard circa 1880, the home was purchased by tire magnate Fred Morgan in 1895. In 1923, Morgan's widow sold the home to the Chicago Home for Convalescent Women and Children. This charitable organization was founded by former missionary and healthcare worker Ann Hibbard in 1902 to provide poor women a place to heal after being discharged from hospitals. As this 1902 article on the left explained, many a woman, therefore, is unavoidably sent away from the hospital long before she is in fit condition to take up the battle of life. The few institutions at which such unfortunate sufferers can receive pending renewed strength and complete recovery are almost always filled to overflowing. Only the county poorhouse remains. And although Miss Hibbert had begun her work as a missionary for the Episcopal Church, the home was to, quote, no sectarian basis or bias whatever. The home's original location was a spacious residence at 1516 West Adams Street on the near west side, and the Chicago Tribune stated that the Chicago Home for Convalescent Women is a charitable institution that marks a new departure in the work that is being done on behalf of the needy women of the city. Women were at the heart and head of the organization from its beginning. Women's clubs made monetary and in-kind donations. The society pages of Chicago's newspapers published news of fundraising events for the charity organized by the women who served on the boards of the CHCWC for Chicago Home for Convalescent Women and Children. By 1912, the need to provide the same type of convalescent care for children led the home to add a ward for children, and the organization became the name that we know today of the Convalescent Home, Chicago Home for Convalescent Women and Children. The 1912 article at the left lists the women members of the organization whose subscriptions funded the work of the home. The article noted that the home was, quote, open to anyone irrespective of religion or nationality, unquote, and provided a snapshot of the population served. During the last year, the home has cared for 280 patients, 72 of which were children. These were sent by the United Charities, the Mary Thompson Hospital, the University of Chicago Settlement, the Maxwell Settlement, the Juvenile Court, the Legal Aid and Jewish Society, etc. So needed were its services that by 1923, the CHCWC had expanded beyond the capacity of its original home, and the organization purchased the residence at 2678 Washington with plans to add a new building. They established their headquarters at the property and built the existing dormitory with wards devoted to the care of children. Their work at this new location continued to be in great demand and was one of the rare institutions that served this often overlooked population. A 1929 Tribune article noted that the home is filled continually to the limit of its capacity, and there is always a waiting list. There is only one other non-sectarian, entirely free institution of its kind in the city. The organization also strove to increase the services it provided, and by 1938, besides the 66 beds it provided, it had installed a library, introduced courses of study, and brought in teachers for the children, working with organizations like the University of Chicago's Anne Henry of Christopher School for Crippled Children and the Spalding School for Crippled Children. The 1941 article at left has photos taken at 2678 West Washington of children who, quote, couldn't stand in line like other children at graduation ceremonies, unquote, receiving degrees. By 1946, former President Miss Mary West noted that the CHCWC was forced to close due to a shortage of nurses and other hospital staff. It was estimated at that time that the 2 locations of the facility, the one on Adams and this one on Washington, had served over 15,000 women and children since 1902. The residence was donated to the Chicago Community Trust, who determined that an organization called the Florence Crittenton Anchorage had the mission most similar to that of the convalescent home and offered use of the home to them in 1949. It was a fortuitous time for the Anchorage, as their previous location had been closed due to its condition. The Florence Crittenton Anchorage in Chicago traced its origins to 1886. In that year, educator, women's suffragist, and then national president of the Women's Christian Temperance Union, Frances Willard, along with Dr. Kate Bushnell and Willard's successor, Matilda Karst, opened a mission dedicated to serving the needs of sex workers or those at risk for becoming one. It was known as the Anchorage and had various locations, including the first one at 125 Plymouth, shown at left. In 1893, the Anchorage became associated with the National Florence Crittenton Mission, when the National Mission provided important funding to the struggling Anchorage in Chicago. The National Florence Crittenton Mission was founded in 1883 by philanthropist Charles N. Crittenton to provide a home and education to girls and women being exploited for sex, escaping violent relationships, or trying to survive as single mothers, or to homeless girls or immigrant women who came to this country alone. The first Florence Crittenton home was established in New York's Lower West Side in 1883. The first and all subsequent homes were named after Mr. Crittenton's daughter, who had died at the age of 4, inspiring him to dedicate his life that others need not suffer as he had. And she is pictured in the brochure at right. With a huge unmet need for support of struggling women throughout the United States, Congress responded by chartering the National Florence Crittenton Mission Organization in 1898 with a special act signed by President McKinley. A network of affiliated homes sprung up across the country and even outside the U.S. Centered mainly in large cities, these shelters evolved over time to become maternity homes for unwed mothers. Chicago's charitable health care facilities were often segregated by gender, nationality, race, or religion, but the Florence Crittenton Anchorage was, from its very beginning, integrated. They served any woman in need, regardless of nationality, race, or religion. The 1922 annual report, shown at right, reflects this with a long list of nationalities and churches at the bottom. The Chicago Anchorage's move to 2678 West Washington allowed the home to reopen in 1949. In a 1949 letter to a subscription department of the Chicago Association of Commerce and Industry, the director, Jen Rose Jerry, explained their use of the new property at 2678. The main house was said to have a delightful, home-like atmosphere and was used for living rooms, a dining room, kitchen, offices, and staff quarters. The dormitory was set up with 11 sleeping rooms, which accommodated 30 residents, 2 nurseries, a nurse's station, and a well-equipped formula room. The letter went on to detail the purpose, nature, and scope of the services provided at 2678. Our program is set up to give unmarried mothers the protections which they need, which include social, physical, and emotional. For those who do not want to venture out at all, our 2 enclosed yards give opportunity for being out of doors without being on the street. We have a staff of 4 graduate nurses giving 24-hour nursing services. Meals are carefully planned to meet the health needs of this particular group. Each resident is having casework service from an outside agency. Those who are not referred through social service agencies are referred to us by helpful resources. Discharge is anywhere from 24 days after delivery up to the end of the postpartum period of 6 weeks. Our intake is unrestricted as to race, color, creed, and our population is unsegregated. While we have a capacity for 30 girls and 20 infants, we have yet to reach our full capacity, but expect to do that before the end of the year. Throughout its existence, women volunteers were the backbone of this Anchorage, from organization and setup to fundraising. Women also staffed the facility as nurses, directors, and social workers. Services offered there evolved over the years, from being a shelter for homeless and destitute women to, in these early years, the home sheltered not only the women themselves, but also in the case of abandoned wives, their young children. In fact, one of their goals was to help mothers establish and maintain close ties with their children. In the face of social censure of such mothers, of unmarried mothers, the Anchorage advocated the practice of unwed mothers maintaining custody of their children. Eventually, however, as clients became younger and more middle class, the Anchorage's emphasis shifted to provide a temporary refuge for the last months of a schoolgirl's or single young working woman's pregnancy. In the 1960s, the Anchorage began restricting admittance to women 18 years or older because of strict licensing requirements imposed by city and school officials on agencies caring for minors. This restriction led to a declining enrollment and subsequent financial problems. Despite best efforts, the board reluctantly voted to close the agency in 1973. The property was next acquired by Volunteers of America, a national nonprofit social service organization that utilized the property to house the Living Center for Girls, a program for abused and neglected teenage females. The residential facility at 2678 West Washington provided social work, psychology, and child care services. The top floor of the main house was used for VOA's chapter offices. The organization operated there between 1977 and 1998 when they sold the property. And the property's last institutional tenant was Inner Voice, Inc., a not-for-profit entity formed in 1984 by Reverend Robert Johnson as a soup kitchen on the west side of Chicago. Between 1998 and 2015, Inner Voice operated a family shelter at 2678 West Washington for homeless individuals. To honor that work, in 2011, San Francisco Academy of Art students designed and cast a bronze sculpture entitled Passage. It symbolizes themes of hope, family remembrance, and looking towards the future, and images of Martin Luther King Jr.'s Civil Rights March on the West Side reference Chicago's open housing movement. The piece shown on the right was meant to honor the work done in Chicago to end homelessness. Staff also found that the 2678 West Washington site meets criterion 4 for exemplary architecture. Originally a frame single-family residence, the house at 2678 West Washington was constructed circa 1880 and has undergone stylistic, material, and configuration transformations, first as a home for merchant John H. Howard and later tire magnate Fred W. Morgan. Though built around the 1880s, the house's appearance today derives largely from an 1888 remodeling, which transformed it into a larger masonry structure. Characteristic of the Queen Anne style, the asymmetrical structure has a deep roof, has a complex roof line with a central hipped roof and 3 cross gables and a tower with a conical roof. Its deep-pressed red brick facades are ornamented with a combination of rusticated and smooth limestone along with pressed metal. The photo at right shows west elevation details, which include a decorative chimney, hip-roofed dormer, pressed metal decoration in the gable, stone arcade on the bow window, and wrought iron grillwork at the basement windows. The one-story raised masonry building at the northwest corner of the parcel was designed by Holabird and Roche and constructed in 1923 as a children's ward for the new location of the Chicago Home for Convalescent Women and Children. The successor firm of Holabird, Root, and Bergey was chosen by Florence Crittenton Anchorage for a 1948 remodeling work for a nursery and a one-story addition. The dormitory's classical symmetry, rectangular shape, stuccoed walls, arched openings, coined surrounds, exterior corner coins, and regularly symmetrically placed window openings are all elements common to the period style of Italian Renaissance. However, the markedly steep pitch of the hipped roof and the building's modest one-story height give it a more rural Norman feel suggestive of the period style of French eclectic. These period styles are part of the second phase of the eclectic movement of architecture in America, which dominated domestic architecture between the 2 world wars. The first wave of the eclectic movement began during the decades leading up to the 20th century, when it began to lose favor. The movement's later resurgence was likely fueled by American soldiers returning home from Europe who had seen the original domestic forms while abroad. The convalescent home for which the dormitory was built consciously looked toward residential styles for its design, as was traditional in women's and children's health care, where facilities were purposefully home-like to help put patients at ease. The trend toward historical styles in domestic architecture of the 1920s tried to incorporate quote-unquote correct architectural details. Consequently, these appear in abundance on the dormitory, giving it a very distinct appearance. A 2-story brick coach house was constructed in 1895. A 1926 permit called for a 1.5-story addition. However, it's not clear where the work was done on the coach house, and the 1950 Sanborn map does not reflect any changes. It's not until the circa 1975 Sanborn map that the footprint of the coach house is enlarged to reflect the current substantially larger structure. Common brick clads the coach house's north and east elevations. At its most visible south elevation, although the brick at the first floor appears similar to the pressed brick of the home, brick at the second floor does not match as well, and approximately half of the elevation has been replaced with that or split-face concrete masonry units. An entrance is inserted into the modern masonry, but alterations are extensive enough that it's unclear if there was an entrance or windows there historically. Staff recommend that replacement of masonry with non-compatible split-face concrete masonry units over approximately half the most visible elevation and the inability to determine the historic configuration and appearance compromise the integrity of the structure to a degree that it should be excluded from the significant historical and architectural features of the property. Finally, staff also believe the property meets criterion 5 as the work of significant designers. The 1923 dormitory was designed by Holabird and Roche, a firm recognized for its innovative contributions to the Chicago School of Architecture. Holabird and Roche was one of the most successful and prolific architectural firms in Chicago between 1883 and 1927, the years of the first partnership before successor firms took over. Around the time the dormitory was built, the firm was responsible for 5 to 10% of the construction in the city of Chicago. In 1948, the successor firm Holliber, Root, and McGee designed an addition and remodeling, and the firm continued to shape the look of the city of Chicago over the course of the 20th century, and they continue to contribute to the city's architectural excellence today. Over a dozen of their buildings are designated as individual Chicago landmarks, including the Old Colony, Marquette, the building that we're sitting in right now, the City Hall County Building, the Three Arts Club, the Palmer House Hotel, 333 North Michigan, and the Chicago Board of Trade. In addition to the landmark criteria, we recommend that the site also meets the separate integrity criterion. Both the main house and dormitory maintain the same form, location, design, setting, and majority of materials as historic. The main house's doors and windows have been replaced, and circa 2017 exterior work appears to have involved the replacement of dentelated pressed metal cornice at the top of the second floor with siding, but the overall impact is not enough to interfere with the home's historic appearance. There are also isolated patches of stucco loss and masonry failure at the dormitory, but these can be repaired. As noted previously, the integrity of the coach house has been significantly impacted by replacement masonry, and therefore staff recommend its exclusion from the significant historical and architectural features of the property. Those features, staff therefore recommend that these features be preliminarily identified as all exterior elevations, including roof lines of the main house and dormitory, and the 2011 bronze passage sculpture. The current location of the passage sculpture is not integral to the site's historic configuration, so the statue may be relocated elsewhere on the site. Alderman Walter Burnett Jr. is aware of the proposed designation, but has not shared an opinion. We received a letter of support for the designation from Max Chavez of Preservation Chicago, whom we would like to thank for sharing his research on the property. Staff contacted the owner via email and voicemail multiple times regarding today's meeting, but they did not respond and, to my knowledge, are not here today. Please speak up if that's not the case. Okay, great. Thank you. The preliminary designation is before you today. Please let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Kendallin. Does the commission have any questions for Kendallin at this time? Commissioner Hughes?
Yes, thank you. My question is about the coach house, the materials that are not original. About what time approximate were those materials added from the Sanborn maps?
Unfortunately, earlier permits don't break down to that level of detail. Obviously, split-face concrete masonry units are going to be a much more modern, much more recent change, and that would have happened after the period of significance. I don't have the exact dates for those. I do have a list of years of permits, but they don't get into that level of detail. So unfortunately, I don't have that information.
Okay. I think I'm asking because For us, do we choose whether or not additions get to be landmarked, even if they're outside of the significant period? I am. I'm posing.
You look like you were, do you want, you look like you were looking at Deanna. Did you want her to answer or me to answer?
Yeah. But the question is, if there's features added to a building later than the period of significance, when is it determined that we can landmark those as well?
We are making that recommendation as staff to you, and you can determine what you feel meets the criteria for landmark designation. So you can include whatever on a specific site, in this case, a parcel, a single parcel, whatever structures you feel meet the criteria and which structures do not.
Understood. Thanks.
Yeah.
To give you a little clarification, part of the landmark also is the sculpture from 2011. And, you know,
Okay, great.
so I don't know if that helps.
It does.
Any other questions? Commissioner Fair.
Yeah, I just wanted to be clear on the language of what was being proposed for demolition. Is it, part of the information we got in the draft really called out the main building, but it is in fact all of the structures on the property?
So I can tell you that in the permit itself, we requested a map with an indication of what was proposed for demolition. The map showed only the main house. However, the owner is here, so you could definitely ask the owner what they have to say regarding that.
Any other questions for Candlin? If not, I'd like to call the owner up. Sir? Would you like to come up and state your name and your affiliation? And if you could speak into the microphone, that'd be great. Thanks.
Thank you, young lady. Appreciate your presentation.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
It's a pleasure meeting you.
You too.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Guillermo Mesa Ortega. I am the owner, and I purchased the building in 2015. Any questions for me? I know you have many.
I guess we could start with Commissioner Fair.
If you could start with clarifying which structures on the property you're actually pursuing demolition.
The permit only consisted of the main house.
Commissioner Hughes.
If it's not financially driven, do you mind sharing what was the purpose behind the permit?
Absolutely. I've owned the property for many years. The underlying intention was to
If you could
redevelop.
speak into the
Oh,
microphone.
sorry. The underlying intention was to redevelop the property, with its own existing, and obviously, if not, redevelop it completely. In 2023, first quarter, I decided to pursue the option of selling it outright. And one of the avenues is to pursue this demolition. In the long end, I am not attached to an outcome, but knowing the uniqueness of the building and the interests of many outdoor buyers, being that it's not for sale to the general public or hasn't been placed, it does give me an option and an avenue to pursue. You're welcome.
Any other questions? Commissioner Cox.
Thank you, Mr. Ortega. Is the sale of the property contingent on the demolition that you've
There is no
requested?
sale, there is not, then this is just another avenue to explore all options afforded to me.
But the intention is to demolish it so that it's a free?
No.
So
Just-
I don't understand.
Just
We
to-
have a demolition.
Just if I do sell it, it does give the prospective buyer an option if he does desire.
Well, the prospective buyer can submit their own request to demolish once they
That's-
know what they want to do with the site.
And that is correct as well.
Okay, so, I mean, that option still remains available to future buyers.
Yes.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a little bit
Go
of
ahead.
follow-up. I know it was mentioned earlier in the presentation that there were no solid plans for the site, and it sounds like you've got, you know, you're keeping your options open. Just wondering if that, you know, wasn't the case, if you did have some ideas for, you know. plans for
Initially,
the
yes.
site.
Initially, I retired from the Marine Corps after 20 years of active duty, retired to Lieutenant Colonel. I left Chicago when I was a young man, went to college, decided to serve my country unless I was having fun. 25 years later, I ended up back here. That being all said, I respect the heritage of the house. I respect the dignity of all the tenants that have been there, everything they have done. But for me, it was more of a place to live and redevelop it. But then, as time went by, things change. Life takes over. So my plans have changed. A dramatic impact has been COVID that put a line, I would say a delay in my plans for 2 to 3 years. If that had not occurred, probably there would have been other options. But in 2023, I did want to explore. This sale is of choice. It's not of necessity. I hope you understand that. And basically, I am exploring all options in order to make sure that I, as a citizen, afforded the right to pursue my interests. Thank you.
Go ahead, Commissioner Hughes.
Yes, thank you for your service,
Oh,
Mr.
thank you.
Ortega. And I guess I just have to blatantly ask, do you support this property becoming a landmark?
I am indifferent. I support it or do not support it. Like I said, I'm not attached to an outcome. I do respect the heritage and the service that has come and has occurred during that place. So hopefully I will answer your question.
Okay, thank you.
You're
Commissioner
welcome.
Cox.
I also wanted to understand what are the implications for the preservation of the structures if it were to be landmarked? I need to understand what options or the future potential buyers will have, or what are going to be the obligations that the future buyer inherits if this is landmarked? Just want to make sure I understand that.
Deanna, if you want to.
Thank you, Commissioner. So if the designation proceeds as recommended by staff, the significant features, as mentioned, are exteriors and roof lines of the main building, main house, and the dormitory. And the sculpture is recognized because of its association with the history, but its exact location is not really the significant element as long as it's retained on the site. So if there are proposals that would include removal of the coach house and redevelopment of any other portion of the site, rehabilitation of these buildings, the interiors are not deemed significant, so changes to the interiors are possible. Any of those applications would come back to the Perma Review Committee for review based on the ordinance that you adopt or recommend to City Council.
So landmarking it will not remove the ability of future owners to redevelop the project, including the adaptive reuse of existing structures. So the, shall we say, the economic or monetary benefit to owning this site will not be removed.
Okay. Any other questions for the owner? If not, thank you, sir.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
I'd like to call for the public comments on this item. Let me start with Deborah Mercer. If you could speak into the microphone, state your name and affiliation, please.
I will. Hi, good afternoon. My name's Deborah Mercer. It's hard to describe my role here. I'm a retired teacher who, when I retired, took up the hobby of driving around the city photographing the architecture, and then going home and researching it just for my own fun. During the course of doing that, I developed a connection with Preservation Chicago, and they've used some of my photos in various presentations that they've done. This particular property, I looked back, I first photographed it in 2014 because it's one of those places you drive by and it's curious. There's this sort of Victorian turreted house, and then there's this thing in the back that I first thought was some sort of stable because I didn't know the history of it. So when the demolition permit appeared, I started doing some more of my own research, not nearly as much as your staff and that Preservation Chicago has done. But in the course of doing that, I ran into a blog by a woman named Jenny Spinner, who is a professor of writing at St. Joseph's College in Philadelphia. She had a blog that relates to this property. I talked to her on the phone and asked if she had any information that she wanted to share with me, and she offered to write a statement, which is what I'm going to read right now. So this is from Jenny Spinner, professor, Department of English, St. Joseph University, Philadelphia. Several years ago, the owner of 2678 West Washington gave me an unimaginable gift that I will never forget: the chance to step inside the beautiful Victorian mansion that he had purchased and was working to restore. I had driven by the property several times over the decade prior, twice just riding by, once getting out and walking around, my hand trailing along the iron gate that ringed the property, just to touch something, anything tangible. 2678 West Washington is not only part of my personal history, but also all of the women who sheltered there for decades during a time in our country's history when out-of-wedlock births were considered so shameful that women were often hidden away in homes such as the one on Washington Boulevard. My birth mother was one of these women. With nowhere to go, she relied on an adoption agency in Chicago to connect her to the Florence Crittenton Anchorage. She lived at 2678 West Washington for 4 months in 1970 before she left to deliver my identical twin sister and me at Illinois Masonic Medical Center. From there, she boarded a train home to her family farm in North Dakota and kept her secret for decades, eventually telling only 2 people: our birth father, whom she married, and a pastor who helped her finally forgive herself. My twin sister and I were part of the last great wave of domestic adoption in the United States. Our story and our birth mothers mirror many others from this time. I've heard from others who lived at 2678 West Washington, or whose mothers did. One woman decided to keep her baby after delivering, moving to Hyde Park to raise her. Another lived there during the 1990s when it was a group home for children who were wards of the state. She remembers pregnant teens there, too. For a long time, the Anchorage only allowed women over 18 to reside in the house, but by the time of its closure, it was the only unwed mother's home in the city, licensed to care for girls as young as 12. It was also by then the only such home in the city for women of color. The house is a part of a national story of women and pregnancy, and Chicago's story, and East Garfield Park's story. I've always wanted to tell that story, or at least my piece of it, and so I've spent countless hours searching through library and city archives, researching the house. During my tour, I shared with the owner floor plans of the inside of the home from the 1960s, the room where social workers recorded the details of the women's lives on intake cards, the kitchen, the food pantry, the visitor's room and library, the dormitory rooms where the women stayed, the courtyard where they had barbecues. While scattered across the city, the history of this house exists in numerous library archives, its importance recognized and preserved. Those archives have been a lifeline for people like me, drawn to documentation of the physical spaces that mark an existence that mostly had been kept from us, and to the physical spaces themselves. Chicago is deeply connected to the history of social service work in the United States. The Florence Crittenton Anchorage is a crucial part of that history. When Jane Addams founded the Hull House Settlement in 1889 in Chicago, the Anchorage had already been operating for 3 years, and it would continue to operate until 1973, moving into the property at 2678 West Washington in 1949. Hull House was designated as a National Historic Landmark in 1965, recognized for its significance to American history and culture. The property at 2678 West Washington deserves similar recognition. In the name of all those who sought shelter there, often when they had no other place to go, please honor their stories, their traumas and courage, their wrenching decisions, the generation of children born to them, the people who cared for them, and the neighborhood that bore witness to it all by granting this property landmark status.
Thank you, Ms. Mercer. Max Chavez?
Good morning, everybody.
Good
Or
morning.
afternoon at this point, geez. Good afternoon, commissioners. It's so nice to see everybody face to face in person. My name is Max Chavez. I am Director of Research and Special Projects at Preservation Chicago. I just want to offer some additional comments in support of this really wonderful move to bring 2678 West Washington into the consideration process for preliminary landmark recommendation and hopefully eventually full landmark status designation as well. As we know, the building currently faces a threat of demolition, and this is an outcome that we absolutely cannot allow to come to pass. As we've seen through this presentation, its significance is undeniable. As a piece of Victorian-era architecture, it remains incredibly intact, and it speaks to a really distinct era of the West Side's development when homes of great stature and quality were commonplace like this. And it harkens back to a time in Chicago when this area would have been heavily populated with important figures of industry like F.W. Morgan. Even more importantly, I would say, as a symbol of the important work of the Florence Crittenton anchorage, the building and its hopeful preservation is of the utmost urgency. There has been rampant demolition, as we all know, on the West Side, and this demolition has removed some of our city's most spectacular architecture and its most momentous history. So in the process, this erases really important accomplishments and lives from our urban fabric. So this is an opportunity then to reverse that course and keep standing a building that tells a story of how, in their moment of need, women in Chicago, particularly women of color in the later years of the home, were able to find a place of support and aid, of life-saving healthcare, and ultimately of safety. Women's history, especially that related to healthcare and reproductive care, it's very much an underrepresented narrative. And it's more appropriate and poignant today now more than ever. And it's one that we wholeheartedly support enshrining through the honor of a landmark designation. So we're very grateful to the landmark staff who so thoroughly researched this property and determined that its long history, as well as its present day relevancy, merited consideration as a landmark. And it's a great example of the 90-day demolition delay working as designed. So we fully agree with the staff's findings that the site merits preliminary landmark recommendation and ultimately full landmark status. I think we'd also like to encourage preservation of the coach house as well, despite maybe having some problems with historical or architectural integrity. I think that its preservation could encourage some sort of reuse in the future. So we'd really like to see that be included as part of the designation. We hope that this is the finding of the commission as well, and that in doing so, we're able to save this important place from the wrecking ball. The loss of a building of this magnitude would be a really tremendous shame. So we hope that instead the building becomes rightfully protected and honored as a landmark of the West Side. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chavez. That is all of the folks that have signed up to speak. Is there anybody else? If none, is there any further discussion on this item? If not, I'd like to call for a motion to adopt the preliminary. Oh, go ahead. Commissioner Cox, go ahead.
Again, it's been helpful to have the current property owner here today to explain a little bit more of the context. You know, I was just in East Garfield last week at a groundbreaking for an affordable housing project that is was the product of a C40 competition, so it has an incredible sustainability agenda. And everyone was, there were speakers that talked about just the fact that there was so much vacant land in East Garfield, and there was someone there who gave us a bit of a historical context of the 1960s civil unrest after Martin Luther King was murdered, and hundreds of properties were lost. And so here we are, 50 years later, still trying to fill in the gaps of that unfortunate mass demolition. But then you get examples like this where, it's not hundreds, but it's single buildings that seem at the time simply another real estate transaction, but in fact have the same overall impact of just erasing massive chapters of history. In this particular case, the history of social service and women's history. And, it seems so incredibly relevant in our time, given the reproductive rights of women that are being challenged to this day. So examples of this is an effort to hold on and tell that story for future generations. So I can't help but think I was disappointed to hear that it was simply a real estate transaction. And sometimes, people, unwillingly, unknowingly buy a piece of property that's a piece of history. They had no idea. But once you know that you are a steward of a piece of social and architectural history, I think that comes with responsibility. And so the history has only helped us to reinforce and validate that this is historically significant, socially significant. And I certainly hope that the commission sees that it is worthy, and that the property owner will be able to use the fact that this site has such a compelling history to attract more interest in the site and potentially its adaptive reuse. This has been a fantastic test case that every single building matters. Every single building has a history, and we are just temporary stewards of that history, and our job is to be good stewards. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Cox. Commissioner Hughes.
Yes, I'm so happy you touched on the women's reproductive rights, because I was going to speak to that as well. But in addition to that, something else that really touched me about this property was the fact that it was all inclusive to all women from all different backgrounds. I cannot tell you how many cases that we get that come before us that is geared towards specific populations. And if we look at our preservation map, you see the disproportionate saving of properties toward affluent populations and populations of particular neighborhoods. And those stories don't always include inclusivity. So this is very important to me for that reason as well. And I 100% support its landmarking.
Thank you, Commissioner Hughes. Anybody else? With that, I'd like to request a motion to adopt the preliminary landmark recommendation for the property located at 2678 West Washington Boulevard. Is there a motion?
So moved, Commissioner Hughes.
Thank you.
Seconded.
Second, and Commissioner Burns, second. I'll do the roll call. Commissioner Jekowitz?
Yes.
Commissioner Cox?
Yes.
Commissioner Fair?
Yes.
Commissioner Ponce?
Yes.
Commissioner Rubin?
Yes.
Commissioner Tolliver?
Yes.
And I am a yes as well. The motion carries unanimously. Which leads us to the item number 4, the preliminary decision on permit application for demolition pursuant to 2-120-740 through 2-120-825 of the Municipal Code for the property located at 2678 West Washington Boulevard. And Joyce, if you could take us through that.
Thank you, Commissioners. Historic Preservation staff received a demolition permit application for the main house at 2678 West Washington on May 19th, 2023. The building is rated orange in the Chicago Historic Resource Survey, therefore the application triggered the demolition delay ordinance. The 90-day demolition delay period afforded by the ordinance expires on August 16th, 2023. The Commission has just voted to give the proposed 2678 West Washington Boulevard preliminary landmark status. A preliminary decision disapproving this demolition application would trigger an expedited consideration of both the proposed designation and permit application. Pursuant to Section 2-120-820, the Commission must schedule and conduct a public hearing on both the proposed designation and the application for demolition permit, and must notify the City Council of its recommendation within 90 days. If the Commission issues a preliminary disapproval of the application pursuant to Sections 2-120-760 and 2-120-780, the Commission shall schedule and conduct a public hearing on both the proposed designation and the application for permit, and shall notify the City Council of its recommendations thereon within 90 days of the date the application for permit is received by the Commission. As you just considered as part of the preliminary landmark recommendation, the parcel outlined in red, in the red dashed line, contains 3 buildings. The application for demolition is only for the main house, which is hatched in orange, and is located mid-block on Washington Boulevard between California and Talman Avenues. As explained in the preliminary summary of information, the main house is a Queen Anne-style residence in its current design, representing successive 1888, 1895, and 1910 remodelings of what began as a frame house built circa 1880. Characteristic of the home's picturesque style, the asymmetrical structure has a complex roofline, and its deep red pressed brick facades at the west, south, and east elevations are ornamented with a combination of rusticated and smooth limestone, along with pressed metal. The home is rectangular in plan, with the longer sides at the east and west elevations. The rear elevation is clad in common brick. Between 1923 and 1946, the property was occupied by the Chicago Home for Convalescent Women and Children, an institution that the Chicago Tribune regarded as a landmark among the city's charitable institutions. It was later occupied by the Florence Crittenhorn Anchorage, providing the same type of services the former occupants provided. The property was then acquired by the Volunteers of America. The property's last institutional tenant was the Inner Voice, Inc., a not-for-profit family shelter and other types of support. Based on the history of the building and the significance of the architecture itself, the preliminary landmark recommendation is that the building meets 2 criteria for landmark designation. Based on the history of the main house, the significance of the architecture itself, the preliminary landmark recommendation is that the building meets 2 criteria for landmark designation. Criterion 1, critical part of the city's heritage is met due to the property serving a critical role in providing care and opportunity to Chicago's most vulnerable, including women and children in need. And criterion 4, important architecture, as an excellent example of a residential building in the Queen Anne architectural style. And as Candlin mentioned in her presentation, this is considered, when considered as a single site, all the structures on the parcel meet 3 criteria. However, the main house meets 2 criteria that I just previously mentioned. The proposed demolition should be reviewed in accordance with the Commission's rules and regulations, and the following criteria should be considered in evaluating whether the demolition would be an adverse effect on the property. Article 3, G3A of the rules and regulations state that work proposed as part of a permit application that is contrary to any of the following criteria is deemed to have an adverse effect. Criterion 1 requires that the work will maintain the significant historical or architectural feature with no material change to that feature. The Commission has preliminarily found that the significant historical and architectural features of the building are all exterior elevations, including roof lines. Demolition of the main house at 2678 West Washington Boulevard would be contrary to the criteria, as the significant historical and architectural features would be removed in their entirety. Article 3, G3B states that demolition of a building or structure designated as a landmark shall be deemed per se adverse effect on the significant historical and architectural features. The applicant seeks to demolish the building, for which the Commission has approved a preliminary landmark recommendation. As a result, the demolition of the building is deemed to have a per se adverse effect, and staff recommends that the Commission issue a preliminary decision disapproving the wrecking permit application. A preliminary decision disapproving the permit application would trigger a public hearing on the proposed designation and permit application to be scheduled in accordance with Section 2-120-820, expedited consideration of designation and permit of the Municipal Code of Chicago. So staff recommends that the commission, A, preliminarily find that pursuant to Article 3, Section G1 of the Rules and Regulations of the Commission on Chicago Landmarks, the significant historical or architectural features of the main house at the proposed 2678 West Washington Boulevard are all exterior elevations, including roof lines. B, preliminarily find that the demolition of the main house at 2678 West Washington Boulevard, a proposed landmark, is contrary to the criteria of Article 3, Section G3A of the Rules and Regulations, and per Section G3B is a per se adverse effect on the significant historical and architectural features. And C, issue a preliminary decision disapproving the demolition application. A preliminary decision disapproving the demolition application would trigger an expedited consideration of the proposed designation and permit application. Pursuant to Section 2-120-820, the Commission must schedule and conduct a public hearing on both the proposed designation and application for a demolition permit and must notify City Council of its recommendation within 90 days. So that concludes, as previously mentioned, a demolition permit is pending, and that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Joyce. Does the commission have any questions of Joyce? Everybody understands this one? Mr. Ortega, would you like to make any further comments on this? No, I would not. Thank you for the opportunity. Nobody has signed up to speak on public comments? One last chance? Okay. Hearing none, I'd like to ask, any further discussion before I ask for a motion? No further discussion?
Yes, I have a question,
Oh.
just for Mr. Ortega. Thank you once again for your service. I was curious why that property, if you have 3 structures, why did you decide to demo that property?
I'm sorry, if you could step up to the microphone. Sorry.
As the military taught me, you got to do it through processes. The other structures do not require. It's an automatic demolition. They are not historical, so that was an easy process. So in order to overcome the first hurdle, which is the house, you attack the first hurdle, and then the rest you just walk through. That would be the simplistic way I would put it. There is no structure or obstacle in demoing the other 2. Therefore, any future owner or property owner could do as they wish.
No, thank you. I just wanted to put things further into context following up from Commissioner Cox's question.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Stating that this buyer could go through this step and still wondering.
Fully understand.
Yeah, but thank you.
No, you're welcome. My pleasure.
Okay, any further discussion? If none, I'd like to request a motion to accept the staff recommendation on the permit application for demolition of 2678 West Washington Boulevard. Is there a motion?
So moved.
That was Commissioner Burns. Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Second, Commissioner Tolliver. Commissioner Jekowitz.
Yes.
Commissioner Cox.
Yes.
Commissioner Fair.
Yes.
Commissioner Hughes.
Yes.
Commissioner Rubin.
Yes.
And I am a yes as well. The motion carries unanimously.
Chair?
Yes.
I made a comment earlier that, if future buyers only knew the history of the sites that they're acquiring, that could help them evaluate the, future use of it. Is it possible that this report that we've received will be attached to any way that future buyers will have it and not, potentially buy the property and then, discover that it is landmark? They certainly will discover that in the sale, but they will have no idea of the rich history unless somehow these reports are made available to them. And I don't know if that is really just incumbent on the current owner, or is there some other way that we can assure that future buyers know the full history of the site that they're purchasing?
Yes, that's a Great comment, Commissioner Cox. I wish that would happen. All the real estate agents that I talk about or talk to, I ask them if they understand the landmark designation of both districts as well as properties. And it's a...
I guess this is a question perhaps for Deanna. How exactly, or to Kenlan, how exactly can we be assured that, again, a very thorough study, it was very insightful, any future owner knows exactly what they're getting into?
So Commissioner, after the city council, should the city council pass the ordinance to designate, we would record against the property that this is a designated Chicago landmark, and there would be reference to that. And of course, our research and information is publicly accessible on our website as well.
Great, thank you.
Great. Item number 5 is the Permanent Review Committee reports, and Commissioner Jekowitz.
Thank you, Chairman. The Permit Review Committee reviewed and conditionally approved one project at its July 6, 2023 meeting. The report summarizing the scope of the proposed project and the committee's decision was included in your packets. This report is for your information and for the record.
Thank you. And Emily, if you could give us a report.
Yeah, sure. So staff reviewed 137 permit applications last month. A total of 155 reviews were performed by staff, with the average number of days to issue approval or corrections being 3.5.
Thank you. Any discussion or questions on this item? If not, I'll call for the adjournment of this meeting. Any motion?
So moved.
Commissioner Hughes. In a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Commissioner Jekowitz, your floor is yours.
And we start the Permit Review Committee at 2:15.